Hi there, this is Solitaire Ronan from Solitaire Ronan Films, and welcome to this random review. And today's random review is Season 2 of Monty Python's Flying Circus. Again, this is from the network releasing deluxe box set of Monty Python, which each season has a viewing notes book, which is rather extensive, just to try and explain all the little cultural references of the time. This season was from 1970 after all. And again, it's just the case with the two discs. So I'm going to be unprofessional again and use my notebook, because there is quite a lot to go through. Again, this season, like all the seasons really, is a bit patchy, but the stuff that is fantastic is still being done today, and the influence still remains today. So episode 1 of season 2 starts with Face the Press with Graham Chapman in a dress. It's the way to start a new season. It has the new gas cooker sketch, which is another example of Monty Python having a look at bureaucracy and paperwork. You kind of wonder whether this scene or this sketch actually led to the bit in Terry Gilliam's Brazil, where Bob Hoskins needs all the forms to kind of, and they're stickler for paperwork and all that, whether that had something to do with it. Then we have a bit of classic Gilliam animation with the pilot shaving his face and then lopping his head off. You have a nice little bit with notice board ads and a newsagent, and Eric Idle is hoping one of them will lead to a prostitute. There's lots of innuendo until the card that he's actually after is literally just prostitute, and of course he doesn't understand what that means. And then one of the classic scenes, you know, if you say to somebody who's not a Monty Python fan, name a Monty Python sketch, it's probably going to be the dead parrot sketch, or the Ministry of Silly Walks. And this is absolutely wonderful. John Cleese with his physical comedy. But again, it works on a visual level, and it also works because, again, it is about bureaucracy gone mad. And yes, we laugh because it's a Ministry of Silly Walks, but there's plenty of government departments that perhaps aren't as overtly ridiculous, but just as silly. And there's also a cameo by John Cleese and Michael Palin as the two Frenchmen who appeared in season 1 with the flying sheep. And then the episode ends with a longer sketch. Again, another classic. It's Ethel the Frog about the Piranha Brothers, which is obviously a piss take of the Craze, with Doug and Dinsdale, and Norman the Spiny Hedgehog. And the fact that Doug is the scary one because he uses sarcasm. I mean, it's a brilliant film, brilliant sketch. Again, the Blu-ray quality on this edition is spectacular. They've never looked as good. Both the studio shot stuff and both location shot stuff just looks amazing. Season 2 was the beginning of the intros and then cutting to John Cleese saying, and now for something completely different. And Michael Palin's It's Man literally was cut from a kind of longer intro in season 1 to literally saying "it's" and then the credits start. So you could argue that episode 1 season 2 is in the conversation for the best episodes of Monty Python ever made, from top to bottom. And then we have season 2, which opens with the Spanish Inquisition, which again is another classic Monty Python sketch. Again, this terrifying organisation that killed thousands of people but are actually populated by idiots, essentially. No clue what they're trying to get at there. Then we have a sketch with no punchline, attacks on Thingy, because of a board meeting where they're discussing we've taxed everything apart from Thingy. A reappearance by the Spanish Inquisition. We have a nice little game of court charades. And then finally the Spanish Inquisition appear for the third time in the episode, to hilarious effect. We have episode 3, where it's flying lessons, but not in a plane. And then we have a plane hijack, when Michael Palin wants the plane who's headed for Cuba to fly to Luton. And then we have another classic sketch, the poet McTeagle, who basically just writes to people asking for money. A wonderful performance by Terry Jones. And again, it's kind of, you have experts talking about, what his poems mean, the depth of them, stuff like lend us a fiver until Thursday. And again, that's just a shot at how pretentious sometimes we get about art and all its meaning and all its depth, when sometimes it can just be rather silly. And next we have a kind of extended milkman psychiatrist thing going on, with an episode of It's the Mind, which just takes the idea of deja vu to the nth degree and to Monty Python degrees. Episode 4 has a nice transformation animation by Gilliam into a butterfly. Then we have another one of my favourite sketches, the architect sketch, where architects are brought in with to design a block of flats. But the first architect, played by John Cleese, designs slaughterhouses. So he goes into detail of how the people are taken in conveyor belts and then, slaughtered. Eric Idle, his architect, his plan essentially falls apart and blows up. But it's all about getting in with the Masons as well, because John Cleese just wants to get into the Masons. And again, that leads into another wonderful idea of the bishop, who is kind of this equaliser figure before the equaliser. But he's always late, just as members of the clergy are being blown up or shot. And again, that has a recurring thing as well. It's got a great title sequence for The Bishop. It's not that far off from actually one of the 60s TV shows that you saw. And then we have the kind of episode tails off a bit with some chemist sketch and some apologies and apologies about apologies. Then episode 5, which isn't one of the best episodes, but it does start with another classic Monty Python, and that is Blackmail, which, to be honest, I'm surprised we're not actually there yet on television. Michael Palin is a sleazy host who literally shows film or is going to give incriminating information about people if they don't phone in and give them money. It's a classic sketch. Then we have the Royal Society for putting things on top of things, which isn't great. We have the collapsing room, where Eric Idle goes into this stately country house and things start falling apart. He accidentally kills people. And we have a butcher sketch where Eric Idle's butcher is nasty and nice in alternate sentences. Not the best episode after the first 3 or 4, which are really good. And then we have episode 6, which starts with It's a Living, which is pretty much all about how much money the presenters actually make for not actually making much artistic merit. And we have film plagiarism. We have a dung delivery at dinner, which isn't really that good. We have the first appearance of Raymond Luxury Yacht, even though it's not pronounced like that, with his huge nose. We have a nice little marriage sketch. The famous spot animation. And another classic kind of shot on location Python sketch with an election night special, which is pretty much every election night since we've seen. And again, they're taking shots because the two parties are pretty much the sensible party and the silly party, or the slightly silly party. And again, some people have ridiculous names and very long names. Because obviously Cleese and Chapman did like to play with long names. See the wonderful composer in season 1 with the huge long name, which I'm not going to repeat. Episode 7 opens up with the Attila the Hun show, which is basically Attila the Hun but in a 50s comedy show like I Love Lucy. There is Eric Idle in blackface in that episode. Terry Jones, again with any excuse to do a striptease. He did it in season 1 on the seaside. Politician groupies, rat catcher, but the people actually have sheep. News for Parrots, A Tale of Two Cities for parrots, again not great. But then it redeems itself in the end with an episode, with a sketch on village idiots who might be smarter than they appear. Then we have episode 8, not season 8. Episode 8, which starts with Archaeology Today, which turns into this big adventure about height. John Cleese has a wonderful song in the episode. It all goes a bit strange. Then Graham Chapman makes an appeal for sanity. There's another one of Eric Idle's sleazy characters as he goes to the marriage registry office and wants to swap wives. He wants to change them. Spiny Norman from the Piranha Brothers, the large hedgehog, turns up every now and again in this season. We have a sketch with the Gits. We have big game hunters who hunt mosquitoes. And it finishes off with a couple of camp judges. Season 9 has the classic pre-credit sequence with a series of women in bikinis and the camera slowly pans along them, and then there's John Cleese lying on a desk in a bikini, and of course he goes, and now for something completely different. And this is the how to recognise different parts of the body episode. We have the Australian Bruceys, who again it's a juxtaposition of Australian bushmen who are also in the philosophy department. We have a man who contradicts people. We have another appearance by Raymond Luxury Yacht, even though it's not pronounced like that. We have the military display of bad temper and swanning about. We have the killer cars animation and giant cats. We have a return of the Batley Women's Guild, but this time instead of recreating Pearl Harbor, they recreate the first heart transplant on the seaside this time. We have a penguin on a TV with John Cleese and Graham Chapman. At one point, Graham Chapman is desperately trying not to laugh. And it ends up with police songs and a kind of Eurovision spoof. Season 10, again, is one of those... They do a pre-credit sequence, but it lasts for 18 minutes. And this is Scott of the Antarctic. Originally starts with a pop at art house cinema, because there's like this French film and a rubbish tip, and again it's all about pretentiousness, and then it cuts to the shooting of Scott of the Antarctic, but it's on like Painton Beach, and so this is just a pre-credit sequence, but it's 18 minutes long. It's not that great, but it's daft fun. And the other highlight is the fish license. Again, John Cleese. I think he is supposed to be the same guy who had the dead parrot. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Episode 11 has the coffee ad campaign, which has also got leprosy and various diseases in it. We have the lovely sketch about the train timetable murder, and they all talk about which train and the alibi. You couldn't possibly be on the 7:14 because that's got it's a lot of fun. Crackpot religions, and it has the classic How Not to Be Seen, which is just wonderful as people try not to be seen. That's fantastic. Episode 12 has a really interesting pre-credit sequence. I think it's called The Black Eagle, which is a kind of pirate smuggler film. So we almost kind of walk in a completely different film. And then we get a few minutes into it. And then again, John Cleese just says it now for something completely different. The Hungarian phrasebook scene sketch, which is wonderful. We have all these famous political leaders, like Karl Marx and Che Guevara, and Mao Zedong, and instead of a political quiz, it's pretty much a general knowledge quiz, a football quiz. Terry Jones' Karl Marx gets to the final and gets asked a couple of political questions which he can answer without any trouble, and then he's asked who won the cup final in like 1965 or something like that. Of course, he's got no idea. And then we have an interesting concept which doesn't actually last that long and isn't really explored as well as it could have been. It's characters from paintings who go on strike and leave their paintings. It's quite an interesting concept which doesn't actually go that far. And then you have the classic Ypres 1914 sketch about a group of soldiers who don't have enough rations, so one of them's going to have to kill themselves so the others can live. And of course they draw straws, and every time it's Graham Chapman's officer that gets the short straw, and of course because he's an officer he keeps wanting recounts, and I've got the short straw, so that means I decide how we're going to decide who's going to... And it turns out John Cleese, who has lost both arms, they ask whoever doesn't want to stay here and shoot themselves, hands up. That's a wonderful scene. And then we just cut to a random kind of pantomime and theatre hospital ward for kind of casualties of the theatre, and there's a Richard III ward, which is quite amusing. And then it ends with the spam scene in the cafe about the menu with all the different things with spam, which again shouldn't be funny, but it just is for some reason. I don't really know why. And then episode 13, the last episode in the season, you have characters, somebody talks in a roundabout way, you have somebody who speaks only the end of words, somebody that speaks the beginning of words, and somebody who speaks the middle of words. Spiny Norman, the imaginary hedgehog, makes an appearance again. We have the drill sergeant in a military hospital, and that leads to a hospital where the doctors are actually looked after, which is a nice idea, instead of the patients. We have a nice little short exploding version of the Blue Danube. And then there's really two wonderful scenes, sketches, that are kind of right on the borderline of what they could get away with, I think. The first one is the cannibalism on a boat, where they've been lost for days. It takes like 2 or 3 goes for the sketch to actually start because people keep fluffing their lines. But it's basically they all want... It's like they each have their own choice of crewmate that they would rather eat. And of course nobody wants to eat the captain. And it's like he's put out and nobody wants to eat him. And then it kind of turns into, it's actually a restaurant and a waitress goes by and it's like, well, I'll have his leg and I'll have things. And then that leads to an even darker one about a man who takes his mother to the undertaker. And it's like, the undertaker's like, do you want to bury her? Do you want to dump her? Or she's actually quite young, so we could actually cook her. And again, it's like, well, if you feel bad about eating your mother, you know, we can always dig a hole and you can vomit in it. You know, it's sometimes it's like, how did they get away with that in 1970 on the BBC? So that one is so good, but it's obviously very dark. And again, you do kind of go, how did they get away with it? And that's a very quick overview of season 2. Again, it's patchy. Again, there's things like, you know, the Scot of the Antarctic, which does go on a little bit. But again, there's so much good stuff. And again, when they hit on the good stuff, it's just wonderful. You know, the Spanish Inquisition, amongst others. So Monty Python fans obviously will love it, and we put up with, you know, the flaws, because again, the stuff that is gold is pretty much the gold standard for the next 40-50 years, certainly in British comedy. So thanks very much for watching season 2 of Monty Python. Again, these are available, I think, on standard editions rather than the box. I don't know whether the box is still available. But again, you get these huge viewing notes books. And hopefully you'll join me again for perhaps a season 3 overview on a random review. So thanks very much for watching. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.